Good morning, members and government representatives. This is a public hearing to receive public views on studies related to artificial islands in the central waters. Perhaps I will first invite the deputations and individuals to join us. Now, if I may brief members on the arrangement. At the public hearing held on the 13th of April, the panel already received views from 110 deputations and individuals. Today we will continue to receive views. So the arrangement is like this. Today there are 157 deputations or individuals attending the meeting. There will be 5 sessions. And that will take us to 7:15 p.m. today. Each session is about 2 hours. In between each 2 sessions, there will be a short break of 5 minutes. So for the first and second sessions, they will be held in the morning. And then lunch break will be from 12:55 to 2 p.m. And then for the third to fifth sessions, they will be held from 2 p.m. to 7:10 tonight. So that's for your information. Yes.
或者嗱，我就想同各位在座嘅出席團體或者人士咧，就介紹一下，即係我哋。
Perhaps I can first inform the deputations and individuals of the relevant arrangement. Now, you may make use of the where the EP is. Channel 0 is floor, Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is English, and Channel 3 is Putonghua. So you could wear the EPs if you wish. And each person will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that your oral and written submissions will not be protected by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Please also take note of the note for members of the public attending meetings in conference rooms or observing meetings in public galleries in the Legislative Council complex. The notice also tabled before you, so please observe the rules spelled out in the note, and that includes observing order, no shouting or chanting slogans, no rowdy behavior, and no display of slogans. And if you have prepared speech, please write down your name on the text, and then later on when you leave, please pass on the text to our staff for members' reference. I will invite you to speak by the order you're seated. First, Mr. Yu Yik Hong. Good morning. I support the development of the artificial islands in central waters because it will provide more housing supply and address our housing needs. And also, the artificial islands may be developed into the third core business district in Hong Kong, CBD3, that is. Now, with government departments and other organizations moving into CBD, and then there will be the relevant link roads and so on. So transport network will be developed as well, and that will help to address the over the saturation of development in the central district and so on. And also with the completion of the artificial islands in central waters, that will substantially shorten the travelling time between Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. That means there will be closer integration between Hong Kong and the mainland, and that would also benefit the development of the Greater Bay Area and the Belt and Road initiatives. And with various facilities being moved into the new CBD, that will provide a large number of jobs. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Wei Tong. Good morning. I believe the development of the artificial islands in central waters would benefit Hong Kong, but of course there must be proper support infrastructure. Now, in promoting ecotourism and water sports, the artificial islands will have great potential, and that is in line with the development of initiatives of the mainland Hong Kong. And also, there will be catering facilities, recreation facilities, and so on that will enhance the quality of living of the people of Hong Kong. Now, the LCSD now operates 5 water sports centers. There's one in Sai Kung, another near the Stanley Prison, and there's one in St. Stephen's Bay. At Tai Mei Tuk, there's also a water sports center. For Sai Kung, that's the Wong Shek Water Sports Center. So, 5 centers altogether. But I believe there are insufficient water sports facilities in Hong Kong. Now, the government has wanted to build another water sports center since a long time ago, but because of various problems such as the concern about fairways, water quality and so on, so the project was eventually dropped. Now, the artificial islands will be in the middle of, it will be near Lantau, Hong Kong, and so on, so it will be very convenient and highly accessible. At the same time, there will be beautiful sea view, and there's a long coastline. And because there are no major fairways in the area, so that will be a good place for people to go for water sports. That's why the artificial islands in the central waters would help the development of water sports facilities and so on. Thank you. Next, Mr. Yun Sai Kit. Good morning. I very much support the project. I can see that the needs for the project. I hope that this place will become a brand new smart city, and then for the construction industry, and this will be an advanced example for the industry, and so this will become a great smart city. And then we could, of course, make reference to the advanced technology adopted in other places in taking forward this development. Now, in the past decade or two, the local construction industry may not have been the leader in technological advancement. In other places such as Japan and Singapore, they have developed an advanced comprehensive transport network. Now, say in terms of the operation, the repair, maintenance, and so on, they have an advanced system for monitoring and management, and they're able to create a sustainable, low-carbon environment. So we hope this artificial islands will also be developed in the same way. Next, Mr. Lee Ka-ho. Yes, I represent the Civic Party to raise an objection against the project. Now, before this latest policy, Hong Kong government has always been eyeing Lantau Islands. Now, Lantau Islands were the backyard of Hong Kong people. It provides us with a nice environment. But now, since the last term of the government, that is C.Y. Leung, in 2014, in his policy address, he said that he's going to develop the Lantau Islands, and then there will be the 2030 plus, and then the Lantau blueprint, and the latest tomorrow Lantau vision. The government has always been wanting to develop Lantau Islands. As you know, near Lantau Islands, there have been a stream of construction works, Tong Chong reclamation, Seal Ho Wan development, the third runway, and so on. So there's a reclamation all around Lantau Islands. Can we still call Lantau Islands our garden because it's been messed up? And now let's talk about the artificial islands in the central waters. Let's talk about the construction cost. We're told that it will cost about $624 billion. So it's the most expensive infrastructure projects in Hong Kong so far. But do you think that's enough? Take a guess. Well, you can look at the plans that have been published. It only covers the Khao Yi Chau Artificial Island, 1,000 hectares, and the Hailing Chau Artificial Island is not even counted. And then it's possible there will be another longer-term development, again, that cost not counted. So let's look at construction costs announced. If we go by the Building Works Tender Price Index in Hong Kong, Building Works projects costs have been going up. Now we're given the 2018 price, but 6 years later, perhaps the cost will go up to $720 billion. And then you said that you will consider the cost on money of the day terms. So let's consider the 2022 cost, and then perhaps at the end will cost some $1,000 billion. And of course, for many major infrastructure projects in Hong Kong, there's serious cost overrun. For example, the Express Rail Link. At first, we're told it will cost us $66.9 billion, but at the end, the cost was 30% higher. It was $86.4 billion. And then, so you can just ask anyone in the street that they will say that this is a deception. So this is, 1 in 100 years deception or fraud. And then my colleagues will give you the reasons why the Civic Party is against the project. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chee Kin Fan. For the study on the artificial islands in the central waters, I have the following points to make. Now, over the past few years, there's been much grievances among young people in Hong Kong. Now, for friends around me, some of them may actually have a good job and they're making good money, but they still don't see much hope, and there's little upward mobility. The key problem is with land supply. Now, in Hong Kong, we've always relied on reclamation and other means to make land available. Now, I don't see why. I really don't understand why reclamation has become a heinous crime. Now, the CEs announced this Lantau Islands reclamation project to give hope to our young generation. So young people are able to own their homes. Now, I'm a resident of Tseung Kwan O. I could see for myself that most of the new buildings are built on reclaimed land. And then in our district, property prices have gone up substantially. Even for public housing flat, it will cost some $2-3 million now. But then we can always see that the residents are happy when they're able to get a public housing unit. But then now we are really concerned about our children, because the children are growing up, they are starting to work, but then property prices are way beyond their means. Even if they're making reasonable wages, they are not able to afford their own home. For people around us, or say my friends of my age, they also suffering heavier burden, but then the living conditions not improved. Now here we're talking about a grassroots sector. It's really difficult for them to move up the social ladder. In the past, we talked about the Lion Rock spirit. That means if you're willing to work hard, you will succeed at the end. But now it's almost impossible, because it doesn't matter how hard our young people work, they won't even be able to afford a modest home. Now, land prices are so high in Hong Kong. If we're able to turn the Lantau Island into a new town, then there will be properly planned new town with support transport infrastructure, and it will provide a good living environment for the people of Hong Kong. And then the government will be able to build a large number of public housing units. Thank you. Next to Mr. Hong Lingfei. Yes, I represent the Civic Party. Just now, my colleague mentioned that there is an underestimation of the construction cost, so there's a good possibility of cost overrun. Now, I would like to talk about other aspects. For example, consultation. In the 2018 policy address, Tomorrow Lantau vision was announced, but before that, the government never really conducted public consultation on the 1,700 hectare reclamation proposal. And then when the Task Force on Land Supply conducted public consultation, was about 1,000 hectares of reclamation only. And then we conducted an opinion poll, and it's 57% of those interviewed believe there is no need, there's no reason for us to exhaust our reserve just for the Tomorrow Lantau vision. I wonder if the government's heard the views. That there are many other land resources to address the land shortage. For example, the Fanling Golf Course, idle government land and brownfield sites and so on. So the 70% of those interviewed believe the government should first use up such land resources before we consider reclamation. So it's not that we don't want to address the housing issue, but we believe there ought to be priorities in policy initiatives, and we have to spend money wisely. Instead of exhausting our fiscal reserve, why don't we make the most of existing land resources, and then we could build on them as soon as possible. Now, for the artificial islands, actually we haven't yet seen a comprehensive traffic impact assessment. Now, in 2019, the government published the final report of the technical study on transport infrastructure at Kennedy Town for connecting to East Lantau Metropolis. There's a TTIA conducted for the artificial islands in 2016, but so far the government has not made public the content of the assessments. We asked the government to make public the report as soon as possible, so we know what the traffic impact is as a result of the artificial islands. And then also for the Route 11 study, again, it did not take into account the artificial islands, but for Route 11, of course, traffic will go through the artificial islands before they could reach Route 3 and Tuen Mun Road. So therefore, if you want to ask for money, but you are not announcing, making public any of the details in the report, and the devil is in the details. So that's why we want to shelve this project.
Thank you, Chairman. The Institute of Planners support the feasibility study for the artificial island as soon as possible. That's the first point. And second, we urge that the study cover the 10 following aspects. That is, there should be a comprehensive planning and development framework for a livable, sustainable, smart, and resilient urban growth area to meet the aspirations of the community, especially in housing, transport, employment, social inclusion, and environment. And also, we need to take heed of the impact on society. We all need to come up with a comprehensive study. So we urge that there be a high-level steering committee to manage the overall design and management of the study. So this steering committee must include the professional bodies. We need to have professionals from academia, from business, from all spectrum of society. And third, we also need to identify Hong Kong's role in amongst our neighbors in the area. We need to plan our land use, our technical aspects of this land use. We also need to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term development plans. We also need to invite international professionals to be part of our consultant team. And 6, we need to have extensive public engagement throughout the various study stages. And on the 7th point, we need to examine the options of reclamation. In 8, we need to study the population profile, the demography. And point 9, we need to have a comprehensive railway highway network study. And 10, we must adopt a people-oriented quality planning and design approach. Now, in addition, we also need to take note of climate change, and there are 6 areas that we need to be aware of. First of all, the rise of sea level, the surge during typhoon, and 3rd, severe rainstorms, and 4th, strong gusts, and 5th, extreme weather, and 6th, low carbon and climate resilient development. Thank you, Chairman. So that is my report. I can speak Cantonese, but I'll switch over to English.
Hong Kong as an English teacher and as a linguist, and I speak as a layperson with a sincere passion for our environment and our future well-being. I've resided in Mui Wo for 3 years, and I've been an avid hiker on Lantau for nearly 7 years. In my time in Lantau, I've witnessed barking deer, pink dolphins, lantern bugs, kingfishers, cobras, mountain snakes, countless butterflies and insects, and that's not to mention all the trees that provide our ecosystem. The thing is that as humans, we have evolved to have language, and we've sadly taken our ability to speak as an absolute power over the homes and habitats of these other species. These other living beings that call Lantau and Kai Yi Chao home do not have a language or a voice with which they can participate in expressing their views in today's meeting and the general discussion of the ELM. Our dialogue regarding reclamation is purely human-centered. Our own needs are put at the forefront, and one can even argue if this is really about the public's needs or those of a few powerful and rich. As if our own existence does not depend upon the immense biodiversity and environment that surrounds us. We're facing an unprecedented time of climate change, in which in the last decades, for example, the diversity of species worldwide has dropped alarmingly, and Hong Kong, particularly Lantau, is a biodiversity hotspot with vast country parks. We have an opportunity to act as a caretaker and protector of biodiversity. Our urgent focus should not be on our own development and infrastructure, and if that's really the true motivation of this project, but rather on sustaining our existing environment so that it can support us for the future. Reclamation is the worst option, especially in a prime environment, and it will be devastating for climate change. I'd like to make another point as an English teacher of secondary and university school students in Hong Kong. I read countless student essays about the hopelessness that students feel, not because of their future housing situation, but rather a lack of say and power in shaping the future of their city. Students see the future reserves of the city being squandered to continue the economic gain and benefits of the most powerful and rich in Hong Kong. And the enthusiasm of our Land Foundation and people like Alan Zeman really demonstrate that. I want to quote a story from L.M. Montgomery as a character, Captain Jim, looks out into the sea and says, "Isn't that view worth looking at? Nice and far from the marketplace, ain't it? No buying or selling and getting gain. You don't have to pay anything for all that sea and sky. It's free, without money or price." You know, as well as the public, that there are more efficient and more immediate options to resolve the housing issues in Hong Kong. But the problem is the fact that the sea is free, and you are free to rob and take it from those that it belongs to and that are currently living there, as well as Hong Kong's youth.
Hey, 咁啊，多謝先。
Okay, thank you. Next, Mr. Tan Junhong. I'm a member of the Highway Study Group, and as a member of the industry, I'd like to share some views with you. We've heard objections and some queries. They feel that there are impacts on the environment. Now, in the US and Europe or other advanced countries, they are deploying the deep layer cement methodology that has gone through scientific research. It is a advanced reclamation method. So if we all want to have a roof over our heads and prosperity, now where are we going to secure land supply? We need an orderly supply of land. So if you look back 50 years ago, the government had planned ahead for our development, and they put forward a lot of large infrastructure projects that created the metropolis that we are living in today. So Hong Kong people are also very hardworking, but what are we getting in return? It seems disproportionate. It seems that having a roof over our head is a remote prospect. We have smaller and smaller living space. Our housing prices are skyrocketing, and even our community is getting more densely populated. So if we continue to maintain the status quo, and if we don't take action, then the next generation, when they look back, they will be very disappointed. We know that Rome wasn't built in one day, so today all the resources we're enjoying today were the efforts of our predecessors. So we think that the reclamation project needs Hong Kong's public support. We need to take the step forward. Thank you. Mr. Lei Ting-fung. Thank you, Chairman. I recall before the public consultation, Mr. Wong Yufai had emphasized that there was no bias, but then Mrs. Carrie Lam, our CE, before the consultation ended, had already announced the government's plan. That is to spend 1,000 billion on the Lantau Tomorrow Vision. So we have deputations speaking today, and they are saying that there's no need for this plan. Why? First of all, in the 2030 plus document, there was an estimate that by Hong Kong's population by 2043 would reach 8.2 million, a peak. But then this figure has been falling. So in the assumption, it says that we have a shortfall of 1,200 hectares. So that has been repeated. And therefore, we need the Lantau plan. But honestly speaking, if you put aside the 1,200 hectares bloated claim, during the consultation there were also other options floated, such as brownfield sites, the Fanling Golf Course, vacant lots, vacant premises. That can cover our needs. Plus, our small house policy judicial review can release some 900 hectares, so we do have plenty of land. But if the government continues to repeat the shortfall, that is just a guess on their part. So it's the same as the Greater Bay Area. The government is trying to hard sell the artificial island, but they don't mention what are the shortfalls of the plan, such as the fiscal expenditure, the infrastructure. They will be creating uneven population density. We'll have remote areas, people living in remote areas that still have to work in central. And then we also heard that the reclamation will have a very severe negative impact on the environment. So we need to face this. Now, when we shop, the salespeople will ask, "What do you need?" And now the government is saying, "We had something good for you," and that is a fraudulent sales tactic. Who will accept fraudulent sales practice? Now, the government says that they will spend 1,000 billion on the artificial islands. So first of all, they need to recover their expenses. So this will lead to inequitable development. the government will outsource its social services, the infrastructure, the distribution. They will deploy private-public cooperation, and it will lead to more conflict of interest. Ms. Wiley?
I'm greatly honored to be allowed to speak here. I'm very nervous. My name is Yasmin. I represent Lantau Ocean Concern and Green Schools Alliance, and we are against the artificial islands. But as a 15-year-old student, I want to be positive about the future and tell you what we hope for. You saw how many students marched last month for the environment, and so you know how much we care. We want Hong Kong to be proud of its environment. We want to save the green jewel of Lantau and blue wealth of Hong Kong's waters. We want to save what we have, stop species extinction, and promote biodiversity. I want to show my children dolphins, butterflies, birds, and beetles, not concrete tower blocks and an undersea desert where nature used to live. We want ecological civilization. We want to be connected to China and the world, just like you do, but in a modern way. We network. Social media connects us. We work virtually and understand smart systems, ecosystems, and human systems. We don't need a third central business district to do business. We work decentralized, in cool little places, not in glass and steel ivory towers. We work smart, and we work free. We want a clean, green environment to grow up, study, and work in. The GBA could reverse decades of poisoning the air and the sea and could become a reformed beacon of hope for China and the world, a green hope. We want to be physically connected by smart, green transport systems. We don't need 20% of land devoted to roads and parking lots and that old 20th century contraption called a car. And we don't want to risk all our money on big mega projects. We want to evolve learner-centered design as we develop through fast prototyping. And we want community. Smart cities around the world preserve their heritage and renew their old neighborhoods. They don't keep building empty ones and moving strangers into them. Smart places reuse, they recycle. Real communities of people take generations to build, and we should refresh the ones we already have. Hong Kong has Lanzhou things for what we no longer need. Military and industrial sites that are ready for reinvention. Let's reuse and recycle them. To build a positive future society, we need to plan it with young people who have been educated for future tech, working alongside our wise and experienced elders, of course. It is my last hope that the next time I come here, I see more role models sitting opposite, more young female faces to inspire me to help change the world for the better and to represent my views as a young woman who will live in the future you design for me. I hope our elders will listen to my generation and let us contribute to the plans for our own future. Thank you.
好，唔該。周樂恒先生。
Mr. Zhao Loheng. The artificial island study doesn't have a scientific basis. First of all, the government estimate is some 600 billion, but nobody buys that because ever since 97, the mega infrastructure projects, they conduct studies and and it goes over budget. And then by the time it reaches tender, it is getting more and more expensive. For example, the West Kowloon project was over budget. So Carrie Lam says that the people can move in by 2030, but if the project overruns and if you include the long queues for our public housing, then why can't we use a quicker method such as the golf course and the 1,000 hectares being hoarded by real estate developers? So this indicates that the government, and the different professional associations, they want to create employment, but the different work at the construction sites, they can all start more or less at the same time. But if we work on the artificial island, you have to pour sand and you have to wait for the sand to settle. Then our construction workers, such as the bar benders, they won't have any jobs. So do you want them to wait a few years, some 10 years, for the artificial island before they can start work? In the last 20 years, the government had 154 projects, and they deployed the land resumption ordinance, but the judicial review cases only amounted to 8, and they all lost all 8 cases. So the land resumption, there's no difficulty. So rather than spending 1,000 billion on an artificial island, why don't the government resume hoarded agricultural land? So if we use the Lands Department resumption rate to resume 1,700 hectares, it would only cost some 200 billion. So the remaining 800 billion could be used on livelihood issues, and that does not even include the golf course can already make up some 120 hectares. So if you resume the hoarded land, so what can the remaining 800 billion be used on? It could be used on free education for 227 years. We can have all cancer patients, they can have free medical care for, we can have hostels for old age, and in our land debate, there's a claim that there's a 1,200 hectare shortfall, but they don't talk about the hoarded land, the golf course, and also the upcoming projects, for example, the brownfield sites, the loop, and that all adds up to some 2,800 hectares. That is 2 times more than the shortfall. Next, Mr. Liu Weili. Good morning. I am William, and I would like to speak on behalf of marine animals. I major in environmental science, and my thesis was on the Chinese white dolphin in Hong Kong waters and the threats they face. And it's very obvious that the dolphins face major threats. Some 20 years ago, the Chinese white dolphin, the statistics from 20 years ago indicate that in the artificial island waters, we sighted Chinese white dolphins. That's a fact. And by 2009, why did we choose 2009? Because the Hong Kong-Zhuhai Macau Bridge commenced work, and that had a significant impact on the dolphins, because when the Hong Kong-Zhuhai Macau Bridge started work, only 130 hectares was used as the border control point. The northern Lantau waters from that point on did not sight the white dolphins anymore. And now you want to build something 10 times as large and some 1,700 hectares. So just now we heard an industry representative saying that there's a new reclamation technology, and you're telling me that the third runway and the Hong Kong-Zhuhai Macau Bridge technology are using this so-called new technology. So where are the white dolphins? Have they appeared? Have they returned? No. And now you want to build an artificial island that is more than 10 times as large. So why, when you build a white elephant project, when you want to build a marine park and create a resting place for white dolphins?
You have one project after another one. It is impossible for the dolphins to rebuild their habitat. Now you are annihilating them. We still have one kind of dolphin in Hong Kong. I don't know if you've heard about this dolphin in Hong Kong, and it lives in the site of the artificial islands. And according to international studies, this kind of dolphin is listed as a second-class endangered species. And now we haven't done anything for this kind of dolphin, and we are not protecting their habitats. And for the white elephant projects, we are seeing them one after the other. And you told us that you would be building coastal reserves for them, but I've never seen any of these coastal parks working. And for these artificial islands, this area will be 1,700 hectares. You are killing all the dolphins. Next, Mr. Lee Tai-sing. Good morning, Chairman. Today, I would like to focus on the construction of the artificial islands. The government said that this is for people living in the subdivided flats. Well, it's a miracle, because you will need 10 to 20 or even 30 years to build this housing on the artificial islands. Now you are thinking for the people who are living in subdivided units, and you take 2 or 3 decades to build housing units for them. So can you do anything else? For example, how about rental control, and how about providing allowances for the and have-nots? And also there are a lot of idle sites which can be used for housing purposes. Why aren't you doing any of those things? How about the playgrounds? How about military sites? How about the urban renewal authorities sites? All these sites can be used in the short term. And some organizations call for more public housing. I think these organizations should join hands to fight for more land from the government. How about helping the SDU residents with other measures? For example, providing them with electricity subsidy. And there is another thing that I find quite strange. Well, now you are building these islands for SDU residents, but it takes 20 to 30 years to build the islands. So how will you solve the problems for the SDU residents in the coming 2 decades? I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. And I would think to myself, if there are more residential units, does it mean that the property price will go down? Who said that? I have never seen property developers doing that because more units are built. Will there be more public housing? Now you are saying that the ratio will be 7 to 3. Yes, it sounds nice, but we are seeing smaller and smaller residential units. So why don't we fight for bigger public residential units? I'm not talking about Lantau tomorrow. I'm talking about more urgent issues. Well, today I think we should be talking about the allocation of proper size. Well, some people say that the government is very stupid in proposing to build the artificial islands. I don't think the government is stupid. The government is telling us about this Lantau tomorrow project, but I think the whole of Hong Kong will be harmed if this is to go ahead. Next, Mr. Lee Kai-shing. For our organization, we think that the government's proposal of having artificial islands is very correct. We have to solve housing and land problem, and also East Lantau should be developed into a tourist attraction. Why is that? Because for Lantau Tomorrow vision, we have to think about the environment, and we don't know how resilient the place is, and if there is a very strong typhoon in the future, our islands may be a threat. So the government should build the artificial islands so that they will sink in the future and they will become the next Atlantis, and this will definitely become a tourist attraction. Isn't this absurd? For Lantau Tomorrow, we think it is a ridiculous option. It's so expensive and there are so many problems to solve, and you are trying to sell it to us. Are you really doing this for Hong Kong people? Do you think this is really an option for solving Hong Kong's housing problem? How many people can wait so long for the artificial islands? People will still have to live in dire straits. Hong Kong's housing problem is pressing. There are a lot of street sleeper and many people live in SDUs, but the government is only working on this extremely long-term solution, and you do not face squarely Hong Kong people's urgent problems. How about the brownfield sites? Why don't you develop them? Why don't you use the golf course? But the government chooses this option, which will make Hong Kong lose. For Lantau Tomorrow vision, I don't think it can solve the housing and land problems. You are just sacrificing our money, and you are wearing out our patience. Hong Kong people will always lose. The Hong Kong government is not helping Hong Kong people at all. Next, Ms. Yam Chen. I represent a group in Sham Shui Po, which represents its residents. I want to talk about living in contentment. What does it mean, and what do people hope for. I would like to talk about 3 areas. First, for our residents, they want to be housed in public housing, affordable housing, and the housing should not be of poor quality. It must be safe, and it must be fast. We hope that housing can be done as soon as possible so that people don't have to live in SDUs any longer. You don't tell them that they can be housed in 20 years' time. And we don't know how many percent of these artificial islands will be provided to them. Maybe only 1 or 2% will be used for public housing. And so those people will have to wait in the queue for a very long time. So you are not meeting our aspirations. So why are people objecting to this? Because the government is not working for the people. Now, you are promoting reclamation because you want to provide housing for SDU residents and their children. And we're saying that this is a very urgent problem. So can we use the site where the rich and famous play golf? The government says no. We can only use at most 32 hectares. We only can give you a small part of it, and a big part of it will still have to be reserved for people to play golf. So how many people are going to play golf there? 2,000 people, right? And also, people want their future. Now, do we have sustainable development in our city? This is very important for our people. It doesn't mean living in a residential unit. It's living in contentment. It's about the overall development of the city. If in 10 years' time I am housed in public housing, but what about our climate changes? Would that be living in contentment? Do we have to worry about our climate? Are we not qualified to live in a good environment? Now the government is not turning a blind eye. No, it's now turning a blind eye on the impacts on the environment. And also some other representatives have talked about marine ecology. Is nature free? No, nature is not free. There is a cost, and we are now paying much more than we can afford. Now for East Lantau, this is not our developing is not our vision. It is the developers' vision. It's some Chinese-owned company's vision. It is not Hong Kong people's vision. Next, Ms. Li Fengcheng. I come here today to raise my strong objection to the artificial islands. I just represent myself. I work at a grassroots organization. The government has always been saying that they are doing this for the grassroots, for the SDU residents and their children. I think you have heard a lot about them today, but I would like to, so that's why I like to say something else. I was born and have been raised in Changchao, and when I look at the Lantau Tomorrow vision, the government says that 1,700 hectares will be built, and eventually it succumbed, and it's only said that 1,000 hectares will be built now. It says that the feasibility study should be carried out on this. Well, for Changchao South waters, you are also going to study it. So why do you want to build artificial islands to the south of Changchao? In 2011 to 2014, a study was conducted, and the waters south of Changchao was also included, but the government said that for this site, it may seriously affect the currents in the southern part of Changchao, and also the currents in the South China Sea. If rail links and road links are built here, the water quality will be affected. This was written by you, but now you are turning a blind eye to it, right? You've already said that there will be potential impact. So how come nowadays you are trying to do it again? This is point number 1. And point number 2, have you consulted the residents living there? I have been living in Changchao for a very long time. I have never seen a consultation section there. Can you really reach the residents of Changchao? we are not only talking about the old people living there. There are still a lot of young people living on Changchao, and they would take a ferry to work in Hong Kong or Kowloon, and at night they would go back to Changchao. So would you conduct public hearings there? Would you conduct public consultations there so that you can really reach the residents of the island? Well, in public hearings, we can see people's true faces. A lot of engineers would come out to speak for the government. And for the Changchou development has the representative of the fishery industry spoken out. Mr. Ho Chun-yin has been saying a lot of mean things. Has he said anything for the fishermen there? So as a person living on Changchou, I object to the artificial islands. Next, Mr. Ho Chi-chung. I come from an old district residents organization. We are very concerned about urban renewal in Hong Kong. So why are we objecting to the artificial islands in the central waters? We think that this reflects the same principle. That is, for Hong Kong's land problem, it's not about a shortage of land. It's about the uneven distribution of land. So we object to the construction of the artificial islands. As for urban renewal, when the Task Force on Land Supply was still doing its consultation, it said that urban renewal would reduce housing supply in old areas. Now, there must be more land supplies, and reclamation is one of the options. But I think this is just sophistry. When we look at urban renewal, ever since 2001, 1,500 old buildings have been torn down, and the GFA has been increased from 100% to 400%. So you know that by having urban renewal, there will be more GFA. So more people can be accommodated. However, for the urban renewal sites, they have never built public housing on their sites. The new buildings are either luxury residential apartments or they are hotels. So we can see that the government is very cynical. For this reclamation project, you really cannot help people who are in urgent needs. If the Development Bureau really wants to solve people's housing problem, it's very simple. Well, in To Kwa Wan, there will be 9 redevelopment projects. Can you build public housing there on this 9 sites? Then you can really solve people's housing problem. And for the construction of the artificial islands, it's like the e-game Sim City, and when you click a button, you can build islands, and then people can move there. But you have forgotten about environmental protection and economic development. They are all linked. You can't just point to the map and then there will be new lands. So for East Lantau reclamation, are you really doing it for the grassroots? You are saying that 60% of the units there will be public housing. But what if they are turned into subsidized housing for green farm buyers? So I would like to sum up. Well, Hong Kong's land problem is not that we do not have enough land. It's just because of the uneven distribution of land. If there is still injustice, then people will still suffer. Next, Xin Ting. For Lantau Tomorrow vision, what is this vision? Well, Hong Kong was a very hopeful place. In the 18th and 90s, we had our own culture, our own industries. A lot of people were working very hard, and people built their families here. So that's why we have the present Hong Kong. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I am still a young person, and when I was a kid, the adults would say that you are the future pillars of Hong Kong. But is this true? Well, for our generation, we dare not even imagine. We dare not mention the word hope. Well, if you want to fight for your own dreams, you may be imprisoned. Well, a lot of people here are saying that you want to work for the next generation. Have you asked us what next generation are we talking about? So we want to have babies. Now you are spending $500 million on this study. This is not useful. We do not have long-term plans. And now all the reserves will be used on this. This is like gambling. And we've heard that there will be multi-pronged approaches. Yes, you are saying this thing because it seems hopeful. Now we are only left with one option, but this option is the least supported by the public. Even if you build the islands, I don't think a lot of people can enjoy them. How many public residential units will be there? Most of them will be sold, and a lot of people cannot afford them. I am a social worker. I see a lot of people living in poverty, and there are a lot of family tragedies, and people may even have mental problems because of their terrible living environments. We have to take preventive measures. We should distribute our resources in a better manner. We can't tell the people that we will build an island in 20 years' time and then you will have a place to live. I think the government should use its resources better, in a better manner. And for medium and long-term measures, you should think about rental subsidy and other measures. These are what people really need. And also policies should be changed. Now some landowners are overcharging their residents, electricity bills, etc. And also more hospitals should be built, and we should not squander the money on building these artificial islands. Hitler once said that if you want to break up a nation, you have to destroy its civilization and its language. Soon Hong Kong will be gone and we will just have the Greater Bay Area. Your time is up.
唔該，主席。
Next, Mr. Lee Ho-yin. Thank you. I am a trainee social worker that represents Tokawan residents grassroots residents, particularly suffering from high rents. You must have all watched the video of Andy Lau about land supply. Now, I showed the video to residents who've been waiting years for public housing or living in subdivided flats. And I thought for those waiting for public housing, they would be the most affected. They would find the video appealing and they would support the project. But no, instead they objected to the project. It's all about an even distribution of land resources. So we are talking about those needy groups, and still they are against the project. And then those on the top don't care about opposition in the community. They don't care about the habitat and ecology. They just want to push this down our throat. Now, you know, for artificial islands in certain waters, definitely, if this project goes ahead, it will completely destroy the ecology there. Now, the government is saying that the Lantau tomorrow is for next generation, but what about the habitat and the ecology for next generation? Don't they need to be cherished as well? The government and also say that it's for the good of the public because the project will provide a good number of public housing units. Well, let's not forget there's usually an exaggerated number. At the end, we won't get so many flats. And then it's not about insufficient land supply, it's about uneven distribution of land resources. That's what's the problem. Now, we have many sites with private recreation leases and other leisure sites that have the government make good use of these sites. Now, there's a study that shows that there are some 300 hectares of government land not put to good use. That's 14 Tai Kwu Shing developments. And even if you just use 1/3 of that, 300 hectares, that will be enough for building 90,000 transitional housing units. And then for the golf course, there's 170 hectares. And let's take Tokawan as an example. Next to the Hoi Sun Park, there are 2 sites. If we just resume these sites, we are able to build public housing. But the government just wants mega projects. And it doesn't even have the wisdom to make good use of existing land resources. Some residents ask, why don't we put this $500 billion on other people's livelihood measures? So how much longer do we have to wait before we could get public housing? You know, we're in a rush, please. And even when the public housing units eventually built, they will never be enough. The government is not wise in making use of land resources. Now, Michael Wong said that many have underestimated the challenges in developing brownfield sites. But is it because it's challenging that you won't do it? Now, we talk about the well-being of all people in Hong Kong and future generations. We have to be very careful in using such a large sum of money. We have to find the most effective means to solve the housing needs problem. We shouldn't just, do anything at a whim. Now, I am from a concerned group about the grassroots housing issues. There are now 221,000 people living in inadequate housing, such as subdivided flats, rooftop structures, and so on. Many subdivided flat tenants are now suffering from various housing issues. For example, they are charged exorbitant rates for water and electricity, or they are evicted without good reasons, and so on. There are now 260,000 waiting for public housing. On average, the wait is 5 years. So there are many who are inadequately housed, and there are so many waiting for public housing. And the first thing the government does is not to develop existing sites such as idle government land or other sites. And then the government doesn't come up with any targeted measures to deal with the poor living condition. Instead, the government proposes a reclamation project, and it takes at least 10 years. Now, they say that this artificial island will provide a decent housing for the public. And then the government expects this to be completed by 2025. And so in 10 years, 2023, perhaps the first occupation intake will happen. But we don't know if there will be any delays. Now, we're talking about a project that takes 10 years. How would it help the grassroots residents now? So this is total irony. We're talking about 220,000 people living in less than 50 square foot per head. And many people have dire living conditions, and then they couldn't, their income could never keep up with hike in rentals. The government's asking them to wait. Now, waiting 1 day is too long already, and instead the government's asking them to wait over 10 years. So the Artificial Islands project does not really address the needs of grassroots residents now. So how can the government say that this project will help those in the grassroots sector? Now, the government said that it's going to increase the ratio between public and private housing to 70-30. But green public housing also means the subsidized sales housing. So at the end, how many of the 70% would be for rental and how much for sale? Now, the government says that the artificial islands will speed up the shortened waiting time, but is it really true? I hope the government wouldn't use the grassroots sector as the pretext for proceeding with the artificial islands project. There are so many in poor living condition. You're not doing anything to help them, and you ask them to wait another 10 years. That's really cruel. So please don't put the grassroots sector on the spot. Next, Mr. Chen Chi-Fan. Thank you. I support the relevant study. Now, in Hong Kong, we have a shortage of land resources. We need to have we need to build a strategic land bank for our development in the next few decades. Now, there are about 1,300 hectares of brownfield sites in the new territories, but I think we could all see how difficult it is to resume such sites. The government did try to promote development of brownfield sites, but we don't see that it's been effective in providing sufficient land bank. And also with brownfield development, we're not seeing much results. Therefore, we cannot just rely on brownfield development for supply of land. And then people still have long wait for housing, so there are many grievances. Now, from information online, we see that there are now 150,000 applications for public housing. People have to wait more than 5 years for public housing. So without sufficient land bank and land development, we cannot meet the housing needs of the grassroots sector. So that's why we have to embark on this project as soon as possible. Now, of course, public are concerned about the impact on the environment by this project. Of course, is understandable. But the government could hire professionals to conduct environmental impact assessment, and then mitigation measures could be put in place, and we could minimize the impact on the environment. Of course, between conservation and development, we need to strike the right balance. Now we have a comprehensive an EIA mechanism in Hong Kong, so the government could conduct EIAs, and then we could address the concerns with respect to the impact on the environment. Now, reclamation helps the long-term development of any city. There are many examples around the world. Singapore relies on reclamation, and it's been very successful. The Lantau Tomorrow vision could increase our land bank, and it will address the housing needs in Hong Kong. So that's why I support the relevant feasibility study. Thank you. Next, Mr. Wong Hai-Ching. Good morning. I very much support the reclamation project. Now we have a shortage of housing supply. There are people who cannot afford their homes, and rents are high. And then those in the grassroots sector say they are not making much. So with the artificial islands that would address the housing needs. It could also stimulate the economy. So I hope this project will go ahead as soon as possible. And then the government will have more land resources. Because the young generations have housing needs. So that's all. Thank you. Mr. Yip Pui Kei. Thank you. I'm a Lantau resident. I have 2 young children. We live in Mui Wo. Now, I represent the Islands Community Funds Association. Now, we support the relevant feasibility study on the artificial islands in Central Waters. Now, but I've been following the views expressed so far. It seems that we're on a different subject altogether. We're talking about a short-term solution to housing needs, to the long waiting time for public housing and so on. But when we talk about the feasibility study on the artificial islands in the Central Waters, we're talking about something medium term. We're talking about 10, 20, 30 years. So it seems there's a mismatch here between the views expressed and the subject being considered. Now, I have young children. I live in Lantau Islands, as I mentioned. We find that for a long period, there was no construction of HOS flats, so there was a disruption, therefore, in the housing ladder. So it's because, exactly because there was disruption in the medium-term housing production program, the government is now trying to catch up by providing more land and for housing. Now, I fully appreciate all the problems expressed about the short term, but does it mean that we should leave aside then any long-term or medium-term planning? Well, exactly, because we have these short-term problems, we need to think long-term and come up with various solutions. While, of course, the crux of the problem is insufficient land supply. Of course, there are various ways to deal with land supply. We could resume land, we could develop other sites, but is it true that reclamation is really so undesirable? Now, from history, we can see that in Hong Kong, we've reclaimed some 7,000 hectares of land. 1/4 of the population lives on reclaimed land. And then others mentioned Singapore just now. In Singapore, they've reclaimed 1,600 hectares of land, almost double the size for that of Hong Kong. So is it true that reclamation must be bad? I think it really depends. what reclamation is for. Now, I'd like to comment on what the government's doing, well, on reclamation. Lantau tomorrow is actually not Lantau, it's the central waters. But then, in fact, now in Lantau Islands, we have many transport issues. The reason why we have no confidence in the government is because the government cannot address the immediate issues. How can we have trust in them in doing something good in the next 10 years? So it's more about enhancing transparency. Maybe the government comes up with different options and they keep changing. That's why it's confusing to the public. So it's important the government enhance transparency, and that might instill confidence in the people. Mr. Wong Kar-chun. I am represent the platform in concern about subdivided units around Hong Kong. Now, many subdivided flat tenants come to us for help. They ask, when can I get a public housing unit? How can I get a public housing unit sooner? Well, I think the Secretary does not face up to these issues, but we at the front line, as social workers, we often hear such demands. I can't tell the residents, well, the government has this artificial islands project, so in the next 13 years you're going to get public housing. Now, I can't say that. Many said that reclamation is a vision. Yes, we don't rule out the need for more land in the long term in Hong Kong, but at the same time we see a lot of land sites are not put to good use now. Our platform issued extended an invitation to you before for an exchange session. I hope you'll do so later, and then we could go to meet with residents of subdivided units. They will tell you why they can't wait 13 years for public housing, because you know, staying in a subdivided flat for 13 days is already too much. Now the government's talking about multi-pronged approach. Land bank is just a way to adjust land supply. Now we are told that there's no land in Hong Kong, but actually we see there are many land sites not put to use. Why? It's because the government has a high land premium policy. So that's why there's a short supply of land, and that's why developers are holding on to their land supply, and they're waiting for prices to go up before they will build more flats. Now, I won't even talk about speculation, but these are all the reasons leading to high housing prices in Hong Kong. It's not just because there is insufficient land. Now, apart from the question of distribution, the Secretary said that reclamation is a long-term solution, and what you're trying to do is to try to make this, instead of long-term, you're making it medium-term. But still, that's not enough to address the immediate subdivided flat problems. But then every time the government proposes any reclamation, is saying that we're doing this for the people. We're trying to build more public housing. I think there was an opinion poll on land supply. Many said that we should go for options that doesn't affect the natural environment so much, 34%. And so you can see that even the public want land supply solutions that won't impact the environment so much, but they want it quick. Now, many others just mentioned brownfield sites and urban renewal authority sites. They can all be put to good use. That's all. Now, that's the end of submissions by the public. Now, I will invite the Secretary to give a response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, many issues have been raised. I will try to give a reply in summary. Now, I thank you all for coming here, whether you support or not the feasibility study, and we will consider your views all very carefully. Some mentioned that I said some have underestimated the challenges of developing brownfield sites. Yes, I did say so, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to work on brownfield sites. Some mentioned long-term solutions, some long-term, some mentioned immediate solutions. We need both, actually, in Hong Kong. For the 1,000 hectares of reclamation in Khao Yai Chau, now, you can look at timeline proposed by the Task Force on Land Supply. 5 to 10 years means a short to medium-term solution. So we're trying to make what's long-term, medium-term. If we go by our rather aggressive program, then by 2028, there will be the first site available. So 9 years from now. And what are we doing now exactly? No, not today, but I think last time there were friends here who often go to the town planning board as well. Now we try to rezone existing sites so we could increase the development density of developed sites. We're able to provide another 300,000 units. But you know, I'll be honest with you. If we go to any district and we say, let's say next to you there's a greenfield site or a basketball court, and now we want to use it for building public housing, so you can see it's unrealistic to expect consent from or support from the residents. And then we have several new development areas, as you know. We're working hard on those. Kutong, Fanling North. Just yesterday at the Finance Committee, there was a detailed discussion. It seems that this discussion will go on for some more time. And then the end of this year, the Hong Shui Kiu Development Project will be tabled as well. Now, it takes time to turn land into housing supply, of course, but we hope that by 2023, 24, we'll see population intake for the two districts. But of course, for the major phase of the intake, it may be 2027. And then you ask whether we're putting land to good use. Yes, I agree we need to put land to good use. But if you read the report of the task force on land supply, you see that for the so-called idle sites, these are actually fragmented sites. We're not just about adding up the number of hectares of land available. It's about whether a particular site is suitable for high density development, especially housing development. So we need relatively bigger sites, and also these sites must be close to existing transport infrastructure. That's important. Now, for reclamation, the task force on land supply said that this is truly newly added land, because for brownfield sites, for most of them, there are some economic activities there. It's just a matter of changing land use. So that means it's a zero-sum game in a way. But then yesterday, many members, including the non-establishment members, mentioned that there is there's a problem with some resettlement of existing brownfield site users. Now, of course, we could give money compensation, but or we could help them relocate elsewhere. That's all we could do for now. So coming back, in reply to the first question, it's not true that we're not working on brownfield sites. We are working very hard on them. But if you compare that to reclamation, let's take Kutong North and Fanling North. It's not going to be much faster. Hong Shui Kiu may be a bit quicker, but it will still take 8 or 9 or 10 years, starting from planning to land resumption. And many mentioned public housing. Let me give you some factual information for your consideration. Now, first, for public-private housing ratio, we've increased it from 60-40 to 70-30. That's the first point.
Last year, we had 9 sites for public housing, and it yielded 11,000 units. And our target is 13,000, and we've almost met the target. So we have an additional 11,000 units, and all set aside for public housing. So you can see the government's efforts, and we also heard about concerns of housing prices, rent prices. So our HOS sales price are now linked to salary incomes. So if you look at the discount level, it's some 40-50% at market price. So they essentially just have to pay for the land premium. So if Hong Kong people wish to purchase HOS, it is affordable. So if you also look at the economics of it, if there's no supply, it will only get more expensive. On the environmental side, I want to say that our planning and engineering studies there are very strict procedures to deal with these requirements. And just now, it was mentioned that Gao Yizhao is not the habitat of the Chinese white dolphin. We know that dolphins need vast areas. So we are now adopting a very restrained approach to reclamation. If the 1,000 hectares in Gao Yizhao are approved, then the total area that is reclaimed from the sea, it's only increased by 1%, 1 percentage point, 6% to 7%. So compared to Singapore, where 20% of their land is reclaimed, and Macau, more than 50% is reclaimed, we are actually very restrained because we know that there needs to be a balance between development and their environment. On the issue of expense, the expense of 6,000 billion, now there is a concern that whether it will there are concerns whether this will empty our coffers. Now, we are not an investment company. The 1,000 hectares in Gao Yizhao and the relevant infrastructure reclamation, this is a cautious long-term investment. It is not a reckless short-term consumption. So I would like you to consider that as well. Just now, deputations mentioned how we will conduct our studies. I want to repeat once again, in my response to Mr. Jie Weixin, I had said that we will take a people-oriented approach. You know that the design and planning, our surveying, all of these considerations will be deployed. So, Chairman, that would be my response. Okay, we now have time for legislators' questions. So, this discussion relates to a funding application. So when legislators speak, you have to comply with Rule of Procedure 83A. If there is direct or indirect pecuniary interest, the member needs to disclose the nature of the interest before they can speak. So we have three colleagues who wish to speak: Fernando Zhang, Jie Weixin, and Leung Meifen. Well, first of all, I have to thank the deputations for speaking on the artificial island, and I especially commend the young people for their perspective and their concern of our environment. Well, I think everybody needs to respect nature, and they need to protect nature. So this large-scale reclamation project, no matter how you look at it, it will definitely lead to destruction of the natural environment. Now, whether this is reversible and whether it is necessary, I think everybody has made it very clear. We heard grassroots deputations such as Togawan, residents. They made some observations. I also see different young people talk about their concern of the marine environment, the Chinese white dolphin. This is very encouraging. I don't think the environment should be exploited arbitrarily, recklessly, for to serve our needs, because humans are part of nature, even though we are the most destructive. So I don't think it is sustainable if we only destroy. So I want to ask deputations who are concerned about the environment. For example, Yasmin, Wiley, or Mr. Liao, who is majoring in environmental science. So, do you have further information for us? That is, if these central islands are reclaimed, what is the impact of what negative impact will it have on the environment? Now, I've taken up some 4 seconds of your time, so I'll give 30 seconds for a response. Who would like to respond to Mr. Fernando Chung? Well, nobody wants to respond, then you can continue. Then let me ask the government. I know they will say they have considered everything, especially the preliminary study will comply with legal requirements, that is, they need to do an EIA. So, given the large scale study, will you exceed the legal requirement? Thank you for the question. Why do we choose the central waters for reclamation? Because if you compare that to the eastern waters or the western waters, the ecological sensitivity is, we have a lot of projects in the western waters, and that's also a habitat of the Chinese white dolphin, so that's why we chose that site. So the EPA permit has a very strict procedure. There is an opportunity for public consultation, and the public can participate. Okay, your time's up. Mr. Jie Wai Chun. Thank you, Chairman. I need to thank the individuals and deputations. The study on artificial island and central waters, it covers not just the study, there might also be some principles at stake here. So a lot of issues have been highlighted, then a lot of issues, we are now spending 500 million on a study. This is necessary, and through these studies we need to provide more detailed and scientific information. So there should be some relevant suggestions and proposals. So the Secretary had said that we have professional deputations, including the Institute of Planners. They have raised their concerns. So the paper CB bracket 1 846 1819 bracket 43 last week in the deputation we heard the term people oriented. So I hope the study, if it's undertaken, then you need to take heed of professional bodies' advice. Now, if this is undertaken, we cannot just say, oh, we need a budget and we can recover expenses through land sales. It's not as simple as that. As the Secretary said, this is a long-term investment with a yield. So when we have more detailed information, we would have a clearer picture and more figures to analyze. Now, Secretary, you talked about public housing. I heard deputations say that public housing flats are getting smaller and smaller. Well, I'm not sure if I'm correct, but I think there is a minimum. It cannot be lower than 7 square meters interior space, and then per person, and that has gone up in the last few years. So is it really, are public housing units really getting smaller and smaller? Could the Secretary provide some information? Well, regarding public housing, the standard has not decreased. Now the per capita area is not 7 square meters. So because some family members might have deceased, the housing department will not require the tenant to leave. So we have some singleton units, they are small, but for 3-4 person units, it is now 38 square meters. It is an increase from 33 square meters. So the comment that public housing units are getting smaller, that is not true. But in the private sector, we do have small units. So if you're talking about units smaller than 200 square feet, the percentage has not gone up. So that is the market situation. Mr. Lau Guofan. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I have to thank the deputations for sharing their views. The DAB supports the reclamation because we feel we need a multi-pronged approach to land supply. We've heard questions about why we don't approach land supply through releasing brownfields. My understanding is that the government needs a multi-pronged approach. If you look at 2003 or even earlier when there was a pledge of 85,000 units, and now we had a suspension for a few years where no public housing was built, and even now we cannot catch up with the shortfall, and this can probably be traced back to the suspension of building a few years ago. So Hong Kong needs an adequate land supply and land bank. So I want to ask the government, if you focus on reclamation, you won't have resources to do other work. So perhaps you could give us a blueprint, whether we are adopting reclamation or brownfield sites. So is it going to be, do you have concurrent plans? Does our construction industry have the capacity, whether it is foul land or brownfield sites, can they undertake these engineering works? Well, first point, I confirm we are working concurrently, and they have different timelines. Brownfield is ongoing. Reclamation needs to be started. We need to do a study and town planning. That's what will be done in the first 5 or 6 years. So the engineering manpower needs are not very high. So the real reclamation work will start in 2025. So whether we have the capacity, well, you can look at it from different aspects. First of all, the financial aspect. We have expenditure of 130 billion in the coming few years. So it's not just on reclamation. We have to build traffic infrastructure in NTNW. So if you amortize it over 10-15 years, some 40-50 billion per year, and the budget, the overall budget will be some 600-800 million, not including inflation. So currently our expenses per year are some 30-50 billion, and we are able to cover the expenses. Thank you, Chairman. We've heard more than one person say that the Lantau tomorrow takes a long time. We need to go cover a lot of procedures. one of them being town planning, and the public can express their views, and in controversial projects, the town planning board spent a lot of time on public engagement. So that is time that needs to be spent. But the Lantau Tomorrow project is not the only project we have on hand. We have a multi-pronged approach, and people say that well, we cannot wait 10-15 years for that to yield results. We have people who need housing right now. So the Lantau Tomorrow study, now the secretary said after the procedures and we can have the land available 3 years after all the preliminary work is done. So could we make the land available earlier? Because if you look at other cities, where they can build as they reclaim, because we now have an urgent need of land. So how can, we're not asking for the 1,000 hectares in one go, but could we have some concurrent works? Because you need to live up to the CE's pledge of having housing infrastructure and all other facilities ready. So could you include all these requirements? We're also very worried that you will empty our treasury. So our budget every year will be spending more than 600 billion per year. So, and just now you had given us an explanation, so I won't follow up on that. So could you just respond to the questions I raised just now? There's no time left, Mr. Jie. Chairman, I can respond briefly. We can compress time where we can, but we respect the town planning. But there's not much where we can compress. Sometimes they need 11 months or 18 months for the town planning procedures. So, regarding engineering design, or we will compress where we can, but it has to be reasonable. Just now, Mr. Ho Ji-yun wishes to speak. Mr. Wong, Secretary Wong has explained the Lantau Tomorrow will impact a lot of industries.
I have asked the CE at the Q&A time, and also I have spoken at the budget meetings. I have asked what kind of mitigation initiatives will be launched by the government. Many people in the fisheries industry are very worried. I know that you are willing to listen to us, but if you do not give us any options, it's just a waste of our time. So I would like to ask Mr. Wong today. Now, when you carry out the studies in the future, can you first make an assessment on the impact on our industry? You don't ask us to swallow the East Lantau project before you tell us what initiatives will be provided for us. So I want to ask you once again today. Now, for this $550 million studies, would they include initiatives for the relevant industries? There must be appropriate relief measures for us. And other than the $550 million studies, maybe you should conduct another study first on the impacts on the fishery industry. And only by doing so can you have a better direction. Otherwise, we will still have a lot of queries and there will be problems. I do not want to see more disputes and protests in our society. I don't want you to tell us what to do before you consult us. Thank you for your question. I can tell you one thing for sure. Well, for the studies, of course, we have to carry out an EIA study, and we will be looking at the impact on the industry and the marine ecology. And Mr. Ho asked us if we can do this first. I'm afraid this is not the government's position. There are many elements included, so we cannot do one of them first. And our whole study will be much longer than 42 months if we do this. We will conduct a fishery study, and I'm sure the team will be talking to the industry and try to find out what problems the industry faces. The fishermen have been very dissatisfied with the government's approach. Now you are providing ex gratia payments, or you have some changes in policies. They are all very unhappy about that. And for EIA, yes, you mentioned fishery. However, eventually you would just say that there will only be a very small impact on the fishery industry. And for the third runway, you just say that, well, there will be a medium impact. So when it comes to the government's EIA, really have a lot of queries. Now, just now you're talking about $550 million studies, and how much will be spent on studying fishery. You will just give us the findings, but I hope that you can try your best to understand different industry, and there must be a balanced development among all industries. Mr. Lo Guofen, 3 minutes. Second round. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask this question. Well, for reclamation, we are afraid that there may not be adequate sand or filling materials. However, many of our new towns were built on reclaimed lands. And in the past years, we haven't had much reclamation. So when we handle our construction and demolition waste, we have to transport them back to Taishan, China, for handling. And now Taishan doesn't accept these C&D waste anymore. So we have to transport it even further. But actually, we can use this kind of materials. In the past, people use C&D materials for reclamation, and they could even make money for it. So each year, how much inertia C&D waste do we generate? And we have to ship it out of Hong Kong. Well, each year for inertia C&D waste, we have 15 million tons, and that's enough for a reclamation of 60 hectares. Yes, as you said that, we've been transporting it to Taishan, and I know that they have made a reclamation of several hundred square kilometers of land. And for the Khao Yi Chau reclamation, I think half of the filling materials can come from the C&D waste. So we can put a good use to C&D waste, and we do not have to ship it to a far away place, and the carbon footprints will be less. Yes, I hope that you can let more people understand this. We are talking about more than 1,000 tons. No, not 1,000 tons. It's 10 million tons. I've been talking to the Taishan government. Now they are not receiving our C&D waste anymore. We have to transport it to Vietnam or even further, and we have to pay for that. This is not environmentally friendly, and it's not healthy. So each year, how much do we spend on handling the C&D waste? Do you have the figure? Mr. Lau, I do not have the exact figure with me now. I'll give it to you after the meeting. Because I want to look at it from different perspectives. We can save the money and we can use the C&D waste on reclamation. So I hope that the government can gather the figures and then we can look at this issue from different perspectives in a clearer manner. Mr. Ho Chun-yin, I have two questions. Just now I've heard Mr. Lau's question concerning C&D waste. I may have a different view. Well, we have to look at it from another angle. That is whether it's worth it. At the Fisheries Advisory Committee, we've talked about reclamation, and there is a standard. That is for the C&D waste from the sea. It should be used on the sea, and for this, for those generated from the land, to be used on the land. At West Kowloon, I think they had this problem. There was an underground excavation. They dragged the mud out from the bottom, and then they put a C&D waste in the sea. Well, because that was a reclaimed land. So is this the practice for reclaimed land? If you drag a slush out of it, would you put that waste into the sea? Please go back and check it. I need a clarification from you. I have a second question. That's about fishery studies. I saw you nodded. You said that you were going to do it. So the Development Bureau will be talking to a certain department about fisheries, right? So which department will you be talking to? For the fishery industry, it doesn't mean that when there are more resources, things will be better. A lot of things are involved, the fishermen, the other chains, etc. So you really have to know the fishery industry better if you want to carry out a study. Well, when the studies starts, all the relevant departments will be involved. It's not just about the Development Bureau. Of course, the consultant will be doing its job, but all government departments will be involved. How about the first question? Well, for transporting inertia C&D waste to Taishan, we have been doing it for a long time. It's not contrary to our present policy. Mr. Wong answered a question concerning the fishery study. I'm not too satisfied with it. I hope that after the meeting you can provide me with more information, or at the next industry meeting you have to give us more details. How well do you know the industry? And don't ask us what do you need. I think there have been many years that we've been discussing. You should know what we need. No reclamation is still good for the industry. So if the government wants to touch the sea or farmlands, you have to give us enough justification. That is, after doing all that, our industries will still have a room to develop. Okay, any answer? I've heard his views. Thank you. If that is the case, this session would end here. On behalf of the Legislative Council, I would like to thank the deputations and representatives for coming here today to express your views. As for our next session, it will start at 11. Thank you.